Traders, do you have a hard time accepting losses? Is your first instinct to jump into another trade to make that money back? If so, you're going to want to listen up. In today's episode, I'm joined by Ann Curtin, also known as the Wall Street Coach. We're going to discuss how to lose like a winner. Kim is an expert in guiding traders through common pitfalls. We'll shed light on the common forms of self-sabotage and how to break free from the cycle. We'll uncover why it's crucial to let go of your losses, the art of approaching each trade objectively, and how to embrace self-compassion to build a healthier relationship with yourself and trading. You're not going to want to miss this episode. Let's get started. What's up, traders? Anthony Crudele here, and thank you for tuning in to the Futures Radio Show podcast. Today's podcast is sponsored by FTSE Russell and TradeStation. FTSE Russell is the home of the Russell 2000 Index. Did you know that with an 81% share and 1.6 trillion in institutional assets benchmarked, the Russell 2000 is the top choice by far among institutional investors. Like all U.S. Russell indexes, it's rules-based, reliable, and regularly updated with the latest IPOs and annually rebalanced. To learn more about the FTSE Russell and their products, go to FTSERussell.com. Serious futures traders, level up your skills with TradeStation's powerful platform. Enjoy flexibility, superior trading power, and save big with 50% off brokerage fees for the life of your account. Open a new futures account at TradeStation.com/Anthony. That's TradeStation.com/Anthony, and get 10% intraday margin rates on 3 popular futures markets. Discover why TradeStation is my go-to platform for trading options on futures. Explore their robust platform now at TradeStation.com/Anthony. Kim, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me, Anthony. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm excited to talk with you because this is a question that you and I get a lot. How to lose like a winner. We're going to focus on this today. And it's such a good topic because in trading, as we know, you really need to learn how to lose before you win. And I know we're going to get into all of that. And what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit and maybe have you highlight why you're the person that you and I should be having this conversation about.
I think I'm the person because I have had to go through that journey of how to get comfortable with my humanity for so many years that the work I've done on myself is the work that I share with the clients I work with. And so I'm not speaking to techniques that in theory could work. I'm speaking always about tools that have worked for me and changed my life. And now I know that they have the power to change other people's lives. So it's sort of like, you know, I'm eating what food I prepare. I'm not just saying that restaurant should be good. I'm like, nope, I prepared the meal in the kitchen. I know it tastes good. That's why this is what I would suggest if this is where you want to end up. So I think it's just my own personal drive to become as conscious and aware and awake as I could possibly be. And because of an unusual childhood that I had, I had to get some tools pretty early on. So I asked my first therapist at 10 years old. So I've been doing work on myself for a long time. And these practices are kind of the culmination of all of those decades of work that saved me from despair and frustration and feeling like a victim. And so now these tools were so powerful for me. I sort of feel it's my priesthood to get them out there to as many people as possible because I know how powerful they can be. So monetarily, but also emotionally and spiritually. So yeah, long-winded answer.
No, I love it. And you're a Wall Street coach. You focus a lot with traders. How much time are you spending on this topic with other traders?
It's a big part of probably every client's work, right? Because loss is going to always be part and parcel of being a trader. You really, if you really have some serious difficulty with loss, if you feel you're getting super triggered by loss, especially as a novice, you've got to come to like a reconciliation with the fact that this is probably going to be a big part of your trading journey. So if you're not comfortable with that, you better reassess if trading is for you, or do the work on yourself to begin with to make sure that you can find a sort of neutrality in your response to loss. I think it's understandable as human beings, we take loss personally, but because we do, it can sort of put our head and keep it underwater way too long. We can get in our own way after a loss so much easier. And truly, to be honest, there's a physiological impact that happens after a loss as well, where we will find ourselves in a negative spiral. And that can also be dangerous and keep a trader from seeing the next opportunity because they're still sitting in the past of the one they just missed. So I think it's a critical foundational piece of any trader, whether they're novice or sophisticated, experienced 10-year vet or more.
Yeah, absolutely. What's interesting about today's traders versus when I started learning from one of my mentors over 25 years ago. I'm actually coming up to my 25-year anniversary not too long from now. And
Wow.
the first thing that they taught us was second trade first. As a pit trader, they taught us how to take a loss quickly and how to scratch first. They never really talked to us about how to take a winner. It's very strange versus the dynamic nowadays where all you see on social media, all you see with all these strategies is
Wow.
I picked the bottom. I had this big runner, and everyone only talks about the winners. And I understand it's because there's a lot of sales involved in it. There's a lot of ego and chest pounding in it, but in reality is it's the winners we've always were taught are going to take care of themselves, but you have to learn second trade first, know where you're getting out before you're getting in, because if you do mentally, you're accepting loss before it happens. So when it gets to that point, you're more likely to take a quick action versus just sitting on your hands and letting the loss run you over.
Totally. And going into paralysis, going into panic, going into shame. I think it's genius. And I suspect that facilitated a very different relationship that you had with trading because you were taught that right from the get-go.
Yeah, 100% it did. It is because I always looked to where I was getting out before I was getting in. So my mind was always fixated on where's the price I'm wrong, where's
Yeah.
my risk price, and then I worked backwards from there. So if I was wrong here, that's what I traded according to. I didn't trade according to where I thought the market can go. I traded according to where I thought the market would get me out, where I'd be wrong.
Yep. It's just, I think, a critical distinction around what you said, the way traders are being taught today or encouraged, even if they're not being encouraged overtly, it's that social media kind of exposure that everybody does have that tendency to focus on their best self because they know thousands or more are looking at them. But in those moments when you were with your colleagues, it was a small collective, and it was also encouraged to get comfortable with it, become neutral to it. But our whole culture, just in the last 30, 40 years, has been sort of kind of twisted into a very different culture. It's a fast food culture. This focus, part of what my book speaks to is how Milton Friedman unfortunately made a mistake misunderstanding, misreading the corporate mandate that companies were even run for their shareholders most of all. And because of that mistake, I think it's trickled down even to how traders trade. This focus on returns. Business prior to that mistake. It's only 35 years ago that happened. Business wasn't run that way. It wasn't run just for the returns. It was seen as it had impact to the community, to their employees, to their customer. But I think that focus only on returns has kind of warped even trading, where now traders, even young novices, are like, yeah, I'm going to go in there and make a lot of money. I don't think that's how trading was sold to you 25 years ago, was it?
Well, you remember when you come from the trading floor, there was the lure of the guys coming in with the nice cars, parking on P1 at CME, and there was that lifestyle because you were there watching everybody.
Yeah.
And so as a runner or a clerk, you were still lured into it. But
Yeah.
what was interesting about it was that you just saw how everybody almost seemed run down, beaten up. Like you'd see guys worth $50 million and his gym shoes were falling off his feet per se, right? And so you could see the grind that took place. And
Yes.
so it made you respect them a little bit differently because you're like, man, that guy really worked hard at it. It didn't just come naturally. And he's still constantly working at it.
Exactly. And that, I think, is hidden from sight, hidden from view, especially because social media seems to reward those who, present themselves as if they got all their ducks in a row. And, I say this all the time. Nobody puts a picture of themselves, crying on the bathroom floor on social media. And yet that happens to everybody at certain points in our life. So the key is realizing and not making social media wrong. It's part of the culture now, but don't buy it. Just like you didn't buy Madison Avenue's ads before, you'd be like questioning, well, this is an advertisement. Think of that for people. Their social media is their advertisement. That doesn't mean you're seeing all of what's true, all of the pain, suffering, and or challenge. And the focus on winning, it's understandable. We all want to win. We all want to be winners. But to be a real winner today, you do have to get comfortable with that loss. But I suspect that for those traders who lost is a real trigger or a consistent trigger, it's because they have probably some stuff from way back when they were young, where being wrong, where making a mistake was really criticized, and they felt their sense of self-worth get collapsed with their making a mistake. If you feel unworthy, if you feel ashamed of making mistakes, that's an issue that transcends trading. It's going to be showing up every time you lose a poker game or a board game or a spot in a parking lot or on the highway. Like, the reason people get triggered is because often loss gets connected to a feeling of shame. And that's why most of us will resist it. So part of my advocacy, whether it's, through shorts that I put up on social media or in client, session, is how do you begin to separate your self-identity with the concept of, being somehow not worthy? Like, that's the heart of it. If you think being wrong put you in a box of not being worthy, nobody's going to want to sit in that box. But if you can begin to see that mistake is part of what humans do, we are fallible. We will always make mistakes. How do you get comfortable with that? How do you stop being in resistance to that? Because every time you resist, you go into a contraction. When you go into a contraction, you're not taking in oxygen. You're not seeing the full big picture. You're going into tunnel vision. You're compromising all the wisdom you've gathered as a trader from all those years every time you start to shrink and get into a contraction. So what I say to people is, like, do the work on the internal so that you don't get as triggered. You can respond instead of react. But most, even that, still have a tendency to react. And, it's costing them, not just monetarily, but physically, emotionally.
Yeah, I love how you talk about responding, not reacting. And so I want to stay on this. I want to talk about, how do you teach traders to handle their losses effectively, and then maybe discuss some strategies that you recommend for turning those losses into valuable learning experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, again, it starts usually what I'll ask a trader to do is to find a way to experience loss outside of their trading. If loss is a real trigger for somebody and it really causes them to have a great deal of discomfort, then what I will actually say is start to have some exposure therapy outside of trading, because the stakes are so much higher in a trading account, right? Not just your capital, but just your mental capital as well. So I will say, like, I want you, here's just like one homework assignment I've given sometimes, is I want you to lose 100 times this week, everywhere but your trading. Go on purpose, lose. Go play with people who are better at poker than you. Go play a Monopoly game with your 10-year-old and let the 10-year-old win. Like, go find somebody who's looking for that spot. You were there first and let them get it. Like, do all these silly, small trigger ways to experience it, loss, and then start to notice what the self-talk is. What are the catchphrases you hear? What is the story that comes up? Is it okay to curse on your podcast? I don't know if it is.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, then you'll probably hear things inside of yourself like, you stupid idiot, you stupid ass, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, you'll hear this self-criticism that if you start to pay attention to, you'll be like, oh my God, listen to what I'm enduring. Write all those catchphrases down. There's a story like, I'm never going to amount to anything. I'm not going to be a trader. I'm a total jerk. Look at me. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. Like, all of these phrases, or, you know, I'm a terrible driver, or whatever the environment is. See if you can capture all of those, because those are indicators that you are listening to those when you lose in your trading. And I want you to get clear on what they are, because if you don't understand what you're listening to, then they are potentially more likely to keep you on the leash. So that is the first step. Lose in ways outside of your trading that aren't, you know, the most dramatic things in the world. Losing a poker game, losing a parking spot, not that big a deal. Find out what those internal catchphrases are, and then start to get very curious about what that voice sounds like. This would be the beginning of finding out what your self-critic or inner gremlin is saying to you. Often I have discovered, in general, people have a tendency to not be listening to their own voice, but to an inner critic or inner critics collection of voices that make them feel like garbage. And when you listen to that inner critic or inner gremlin, you are going to be consistently self-sabotaged. So the first key is noticing that that is the dialogue in your head. And that's step one. So I'll pause there.
No, it's very interesting to me hear you say that, because I've taken similar steps, I guess, and throughout my journey, and I'm sure other traders have as well. And what it starts to trigger in my mind when I hear you talk like that is see what it feels like in that moment, and then see what it feels like after that moment too, right? Like, it's okay. You know, you lost a Monopoly to a 10-year-old, you know, you lost to somebody who's better than you in chess, and you recovered, and, you know, you're not so taken back that you can't come back. And so part of that for me was removing myself in these situations where I'd be so pissed off and I want to break something or throw something, which I've done many a times, unfortunately, in my career. But then when you're like, you know what, you take a breath and you walk away, you're like, you really like a damn baby, you know? And it's just like, you're not out of business. You didn't do it. And I found that majority of those losses were when I didn't take the time to take the breath. It was the accumulation of them. And like on the tail end of losing is when I would just blow up, right? Blow out an account.
Sure,
right. And it was like not that first couple ones. It was like I just kind of kept internalizing it.
Sure.
And then boom.
Totally. But the key here is that you weren't a baby, and but there is some kind of an inner story that drives us to that sense of anchor or frustration with ourselves. But the key is starting to notice that it's not so much our voice criticizing ourselves, but likely this inner saboteur. And that inner saboteur is something that got born out of circumstance. And what I'm an advocate of is let's go back to where that first started, because if we do, then we have a chance to actually untangle ourselves from it. We are potentially always tethered to it if we don't do that internal work. It's sort of like a dragon inside of ourselves that, you know, sometimes is just living beneath the surface. And if things get hot enough, volatile enough, costly, potentially enough, it will rear its ugly head. And what I'm a huge advocate of is something I call my 5 practices. Those are featured in my book, Transforming Wall Street. One of those 5 practices is called, I call it emotional non-resistance. And that is a practice where I will take a client, take it from the intellect, a metaphoric elevator, down into their body, and I will have them feel that loss. For example, I will have them feel all of that internal criticism that comes up, and I will have them surf it emotionally all the way through to the other side. It's simple, but it's not easy. It's difficult. A lot of emotion might come up, but that practice allows us to discharge what is triggering us to begin with. Most times, in my experience, if loss is a real trigger for people, then that means that there was likely a loss or a number of losses when they were very young that have never fully healed. Our culture has not encouraged us to feel our feelings, but the only way a feeling passes, the only way an emotion passes is if we feel it. We can't think our way out of our feelings, but that's what most of us tend to do. We try to talk ourselves out of it. But actually what we need to do is go and feel the feeling. There have been clients who I've done this work with who have had an emotion or a feeling from something that happened to them when they were 10 years old, but they never fully felt it. And that is what keeps kind of popping back up like a weed, right? Unless you get to the root of the weed, it's going to keep coming up. I'm sort of the person who says, you know, this may not be fun, but I want to get that root out. And that's where I feel most of the traders need to do, because once they go to that root and process that hard to be with emotion, then they don't necessarily have to keep showing back up again and again and again. But it takes a certain level of gravitas and a willingness, you know, to do some hard work, deep work to get that done. But boy, when it's done, I know for myself, my whole life changed.
It's interesting hearing you talk about things that have happened way back when in our lives and how much of an impact they have in our decision making as adults, right? Or even some things that happen to us as an adults and we start later in our life as traders. And it's interesting to me because it just proves once again that we're not really built to do this. It's one of those things where I talk about trading as a journey of oneself. And I know some people are like, you know, that's kind of really, you know, just maybe just, you know, not something that Anthony truly means, or it's just something he just talks about, you know, maybe to get people to, you know, some sort of tweet or something like that. No, and I really feel that way. And it's because when I look at my life, I look at how my journey is and how I've had to figure out so many things about myself to be able to actually make it in this business that my biggest struggles were things that I had to change about myself. It wasn't necessarily about finding the perfect strategies and all these different things. I found a lot of strategies that worked really well over the years. I didn't trade them all that well, a lot of them, but the point of it being is that I had inner demons I had to work out. You know, my competitiveness got in the way of so many things. And, you know, one of the things I want to move on and talk to next is, you know, I'll make it back. You know, I can lose this today because I'll make it back. And we've all been there. We've all done that. And we all know really it never works out for most of us, right? It always ends up putting us in a worse position down the road. I want to talk about that and how do you think traders can avoid that trap?
Yeah. Well, it comes right back to the inability to be with loss, right? So that's a kind of rationalization, so they don't have to be with the loss in the first place. So when you say I'll make it back, it's telling me you haven't accepted that what you've lost, you've lost. You're trying to sugarcoat it, and that is never going to work. And you will never make up your loss. Like, if you take for each one at face value, the loss is the loss. That's it. Clean slate. You're back to trade again. If you constantly keep trying to make up for a loss, you're in the past. You're not in the current. You don't even want to be in the future. You want to be in this present moment. But every time you tell yourself you're making up for a loss, you're taking yourself back into the past. You have a dollar amount in mind, and you're taking all of that, what really can only be called a let me just get the perfect word here. You basically have an attachment to an outcome, and you're taking your attachment to making it back and you're projecting that onto the market. The market doesn't care what your agenda is. Doesn't matter what you're attached to. The market is going to do what it's going to do. But if you come in with yourself having a attachment and an agenda, you can't bring your agenda to the market. It's got what it's got. It's doing what it's doing. But if you bring that agenda, you have already compromised your vision at looking at what the market actually has to offer you. You come in blinded, so to speak, with a patch over your eye because your other eye is looking at, I have to make that back. And that's going to prevent you from seeing what the market may or may not have to offer that day. Every time some trader does that, you are potentially sabotaging an opportunity in front of you because you can't see it for as it is, because you're in resistance to reality. Basically, you're in your own, I want this, I want that. Like, well, we all do, but the market isn't there to give it to you. And to double back on what you said before, I think trading is the school of enlightenment there is, because it's going to constantly show you all the places you have attachments, you have agendas, you have negative feelings about yourself, your relationship to loss, even your relationship to success. That also can get in a lot of traders' ways. Those who have great success can start to self-sabotage because they don't feel worthy of it, or they come from a blue-collar or working-class background, and they start to lose their tribe of people, and now they start to feel isolated and alone, and they may actually put an invisible ceiling on themselves because they feel like, who am I to be able to make this kind of money? So all of these things, the market is going to hold a mirror up to you and force you to be with all these hard truths. So if you don't do work on yourself, well, then the market's going to force you to, and it's going to cost you a lot more than however expensive I or any coach might be. It's not going to be as expensive as what the market's going to extract in the long run.
Oh, so true on so many things. We're going to get to self-sabotage in just a second, but I want to talk about trying to remain emotionally neutral. You see so many people talk about you can't have emotions in trading. I don't believe in that. Pretty sure you don't as well. But talk about trying to find that way of being emotionally neutral, even keeled, maybe we'll call it.
Yeah. Well, I think it does such a disservice the people who tell traders that they can't be emotional, because it's like you might as well tell them they can't breathe oxygen. Like, you are unless you're from another planet, you are going to be emotional. Humans are emotional beings. Nobody is ever, it doesn't. Jocko Willenick is an emotional being. He has learned how to surf his emotions and not be, at the mercy of them, but he still has them. And the key is to begin to realize what emotions get triggered in you. You have to ultimately become intimately connected with how you react to things. What are the day-to-day reactions to loss, to challenge, to struggle? If you don't get clear on what those are, then you're going to have a potentially harder time being able to get yourself unhooked from them. But you first have to notice where you get hooked before you can untangle yourself. And that's why it's so important to realize, oh, I seem to always get upset in this way when that happens to me. Don't judge it. Don't make it wrong, because guess what happens then? You'll be tempted to push it down. You'll be tempted to numb it. And that's what most of us and this culture advocates. When you have a hard to be with a feeling like anger, for example, maybe it's not something socially acceptable, even though it is more so for men than it is for women in our culture today. But let's say you have a hard to be with emotion. You know you shouldn't be, slamming your keyboard down. Before you slam the keyboard, see if you can just have a moment to notice the rage coursing through your veins. Don't be bringing judgment to it. Look at it like you would a scientist. Oh, isn't that fascinating? I am furious right now. I wonder what's happening. I wonder what the stories are that are unfolding. I wonder what that inner gremlin or inner saboteur is screaming in my ear about. That is the key, to not necessarily just get controlled by them. But I'm actually a huge advocate of finding ways to process out those emotions that keep you safe and people around you safe. I'm a big advocate of something called a smash room or a smash shack. There used to be a room in California where you could rent it for the hour, take in a box of plates, put on goggles, keep yourself safe, and go to town. I had a very dear friend create a smash backyard for me for a particular situation. I'm not comfortable with my anger, actually, but I had a lot of anger coming up over something that had, kind of been showing up in therapy for me and my coaching sessions. And I knew I had to process this anger. I had never done it before. And he literally set up his backyard for me to destroy a piece of furniture. This furniture was kind of representative of that situation. And I made sure I was safe and I had the goggles on. He taught me how to even use a chainsaw. Very proud of myself. And he put a whole bunch of tools. Bob Vila would have been proud of him. And I destroyed this very big, large piece of furniture, took it down to like the crumbs. And it was such a cathartic, healthy event. Nobody around me got hurt. We had a safe backyard. I got to do it, kept myself safe. But that sometimes we do have to discharge stuff. And if we can set ourselves up for success in that kind of an environment where we have the right support, then it doesn't necessarily show up in the treating. So I'll pause there because I said a lot.
I agree. I think some people that would be massively beneficial for. I was one of those people at some point in my life for sure, because I've destroyed a couple things in my offices over the years. And I look back at it and I kind of feel like relief after that. And I look back at it also taught me something is like, like just get it off your chest. But also there's other ways to do that. But I want to move on. I want to talk about self-sabotage because I've experienced this on both sides of the spectrum. And I think that a lot of traders probably have a struggle with this. I'm going to talk about both sides, and then I want to hear your thoughts on self-sabotage. First, the first side is, I remember when I first started, I was one of the best risk managers out there, right? With my account, I did great. I was protecting it. And then once I would have a little bit of a loss, I get down to that little bit in my account where I probably needed to even be a better risk manager, is when I became a worse risk manager and almost threw my account out the door, almost a cry for help. Like at this point, just get me out. I can't deal with this anymore. And then the next day I'd be so disappointed in myself and I needed money. And I'd be like, what did I just do to put myself in this situation? And that was very frustrating. And I think maybe we talk about the downside first, and then I will come back and talk about when you're making money, how you can self-sabotage as well.
Sure. I mean, self-sabotage is a protection mechanism. I think we all need to just, come to terms with that first. If we're self-sabotaging, ultimately it's an indicator, just like on the dashboard of our vehicle, that there is fear afoot. There is some kind of caution afoot. Ultimately, we are social creatures, and there can be times where we feel, if we're experiencing loss or we've made mistakes, we feel that sense of isolation, and that we're going to be, either kind of criticized or ultimately rejected in some way. So a lot of times we reject ourselves first before somebody else will. And we figure if we can just, maybe, I think this is part of too, this kind of, it's something Marshall Rosenberg calls a domination culture, where we have a tendency to think that people, he's one of my teachers, and he talks about how deserve is the most dangerous word in the English language, because when we use the word deserve, it implies that sometimes we or others are worthy and sometimes we're not. And that the only people who are worthy of, let's just say, the big picture of love and belonging are the people who earn it. If that's the culture we're all steeped in, certainly men, and the culture of like they have to prove a certain gravitas to be worthy of love and belonging. Women have it too, though. And the heart of that is that if you think everything you do, you have to earn, then you are going to always come from this headspace of your basic sense of worthiness. It's based on production. And yes, you do have to earn the right to be a trader and who has a certain level of, let's say, capital or responsibility. But if your fundamental sense of identity is coming from a place of thinking that you're only worthy of love and belonging if you earn it, that's the first place that self-sabotage gets informed by. So what I say to people is, how do you come to terms in the first place with your innate worthiness, that there's really nothing you can ever do to not be worthy of that sense of belonging? If people can heal that fundamental foundational piece, then I have seen that sense of self-sabotage, whether it's through loss, whether it's through success, start to dissipate, because they start to find a way to get unattached to outcome as their sense of identity. We definitely do have to earn the right to trade, so to speak, because it's not something you can just do without the work. But your sense of worthiness is deep, deep, deeper than that. And that usually, in my experience, is not a place that most people have, ever experienced, like that sense of true fundamental worthiness. And I think that's the first step.
Let's talk about it on the opposite side of the spectrum now, when you've made some money, because I've gone through both of this, as I talked about. The downside, I think most people can relate to it. It's something that's it's almost anticipated. It's almost expected that, when you start getting beaten up by the market, you kind of just throw it in and you say, look at this. I'm just end it, because I just can't make money. And then next thing you know, you can't wait to get back in. But on the opposite side of it, for me, I only had a plan on how to get to a point of where I could make money to do this for a living. I never had a plan on what to do with the money once I made it. And this was one of the most challenging things for me. I would actually say that it was actually more challenging for me once I had made some money, to understand how to sustain success, how to build on success. Because at that point, I was not prepared for it. And I got really caught up in a lot of self-sabotage, overspending, overbuying, which are, I guess, are the same things. People needed money, I'd give it away. I talked to my buddy Pax about this. I mean, I gave away so much money over the years. Traders, oh, I need this. Brothers, friends, cousins, didn't matter. And it was because I didn't know what to do with the money. I didn't feel worthy of making the money, and I put myself in a bad position. Once again, I'm fighting back to try to get back to where I just was. And I
Yeah.
just did it to myself. And I felt like in this almost toilet bowl of just like allowing it to happen where I'm outside of myself and it just happened. And in
Yeah.
many ways, I'm very thankful that it happened because as I started to build it back up, I understood it. But
Yeah.
talk about self-sabotage when a trader does finally make some money and why they seem to a lot of times put themselves in a worse position than they
Yeah.
really needed to be in.
Yep, for sure. I think it's also something we see in young athletes who get great success overnight. We see it with rock stars and musicians. Anybody who suddenly finds themselves in a position with so much more money than they ever expected. But this is tied again to worthiness. And it's also tied to a most of us haven't explored or investigated what our relationship to money is. And our relationship to money, which is sort of crazy, especially for traders, like, especially if you're going to go into that industry, have you explored your relationship to money? And if you come from a poor or middle class or blue collar background, you probably didn't have parents who really had a defined relationship to money either. And that has to be explored. Did you want to say something there?
No, I'm saying exactly. I mean, it's
Yeah,
because the friends of mine that had families with money, they didn't run
yeah,
into this issue. They continued to build wealth.
yeah.
And the friends of ours that didn't have money growing up ended up going back to where they were.
It's because it's hardwired in us. Harv Eker has a great book called The Secrets of the Millionaire Mind, and he talks about it as a temperature set. Each of us has a temperature set, like a little heat air conditioning unit in a house. If you get to, let's say you have it set for 68 degrees, every time the house gets warmer than that, it's going to put on the air conditioner. Every time it gets hotter than that, it's going to, or colder, it's going to put on the heat. That's the same with all of us. We have a money temperature set that we're comfortable at. So if we haven't done some intimate, deep work around what our relationship to money is, then as soon as our bank account starts to reflect too hot or too cold, our system is going to go into overdrive to get us back to what's comfortable. So if we come from a background where we didn't have great wealth, we have to do some work about what the unconscious beliefs are we have about money. I can't tell you how many times when I've started to do that work with a trader, I'll ask them their first experience with money. I'll ask them what are some of the things they're afraid of that people who are rich. How do you describe people who are rich? Well, they probably cheated to get it. Like when you hear sometimes the descriptions of what certain people have around what rich people, what kind of people they are, you would be like, well, of course you don't want to be rich because these sound like awful qualities. So it's starting to get really clear on what do you really believe about money in the first place? How would you describe it? Do you hoard it? There used to be an assessment, I don't know if it's still really out there, called Money Harmony. This is a book by what was her name? Mellon is her last, Olivia Mellon. And she talks about some people have a money monk kind of disposition with money, where money feels like it's dirty or it's not, you can't be spiritual and have money. Some people are hoarders, where they're so afraid they're not going to have enough money that they just save and save and save. They don't really invest. They don't spend perhaps on appropriate things. So it's getting clear on what is your relationship to money. And if there is this sense of old guilt or old shame, or again, that sense of being ostracized, tall poppy syndrome or the crabs in the bucket. Like if you're with a group of people, that's part of why we see movie stars and rock stars hang out with the kids they were friends with in their teens, because they're just trying to hold on to themselves, but then they wind up hearing advice that isn't necessarily in their best interest. But nobody wants to be isolated. And that's the key. So you have to start to do the work on, okay, what are the stories I've gotten about money? What is my current temperature set at? And if my bank account has increased beyond what was comfortable once, how do I begin to unpack all the stories about money that I have and redesign my relationship to money? I would say that's number one on either side.
That's the best explanation I've heard about that, the temperature setting, and it resonated with me so much. So much of this conversation has resonated with me today, Kim. Talk to the traders out there, Kim. I've learned so much just from watching your social media and obviously being able to chat with you today. I just think that you're a breath of fresh air, and I think that you're great for traders. But why should the traders out there come to someone like Kim Ann Curtin?
Well, if they are ready to do the deep work and they want to not be kind of, hindered, I feel like it's, in swimming, what do they say? Like when you have a swimmer who's going to like an Olympian meet, they shave down at their whole body because they want no drag. So if a trader feels they have drag and they feel like they don't want to have that drag anymore, and they're ready to let go of these like invisible things that are holding them back, then they probably want to talk to me.
I love it. And Kim, where could they go? Where could they go to learn more about you, follow you on Twitter, of course, give everybody the Twitter handle and the website?
Sure. Kim Ann Curtin, and Curtin is Curtin, no A, like Jane Curtin from the Days of Old, Saturday Night Live. Kim Ann Curtin is my Twitter handle. The Wall Street Coach is my website, and Wall Street Coach with Kim Ann Curtin is my podcast on YouTube. And I do some live coaching there almost every Wednesday, and they can come and kind of suss it out and get some coaching. People put their questions in the chat box, and then I do laser live coaching on that YouTube channel. We have a good group that comes every Wednesday. So,
Kim, you're fantastic. I love your energy. I love your personality. I love your willingness to help traders. Everybody go check out Kim Ann Curtin. She's the real deal. She's just fantastic, as you can tell from today's conversation. Kim, I can't thank you enough for joining me today. Learned a ton, and we got to do this again. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anthony. I'm really very grateful to you. Thank you for all you do for traders too.
Thank you for listening to Futures Radio Show. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a 5-star review on iTunes. Never miss an episode. Go to anthonycrudele.com and get on our email list for show notifications and for free content that is exclusively for subscribers. Also on anthonycrudele.com, you will find tons of videos and education on trading futures, options, and crypto. Past performance is not indicative of future results. Opinions expressed are solely my own and my guests, and they do not express the views or opinions of my sponsors. Futures Radio Show is produced by Crudele Productions.